I performed several experiments into drones in the game, because in Space Engineers you are capable of adding on remote control blocks that allow you to set up waypoints, GPS locations, and have ships fly to those points in whatever order you set them to, and then do certain actions at that point. You are limited to only 4 actions at each GPS, but using special blocks known as timer blocks or programmable blocks, which are essentially able to let you code in game. You can set it so the GPS activates a timer block or a programmable block, which can then execute more codes. It takes just under a second for a programmable block and timer block to set off instantly, which has to be taken into account when you're using the drones. My experiments with the drones generally consisted of making them fly to GPSs in as smooth a way as possible to make it look like they were flying normally, as if they were a ship in the sequence. And then at certain GPSs be able to fire on their target to simulate how in the scene the fighters come in and bomb the shield and then fly off, or how they come in and fly and bomb the Discovery and then fly off. I also experimented with drones with flying to a GPS point and exploding, because several drones fly towards the destiny as it appears and then just explode whilst one turns off and peels off. This drone work proved interestingly difficult, since the drones weren't smooth flying drones. They went to a GPS, stopped, turned to the next GPS, and then flew towards it, rather than flying, keep on going into a curve kind of thing, because the system wasn't quite designed like that. So my next solution went on from just remote controlling the drones to, for some of them, using a machine that people in Space Engineers and myself build to throw blocks, called a gravity cannon. And this machine essentially uses the inbuilt block called a mass block, which allows a ship to have artificial gravity applied to it, and then use gravity generators which make artificial gravity, using a certain amount of them to create a certain amount of gravitational force and throw the ship across the screen. This proved to be slightly more difficult than just flying the ship, because gravity cannons have a tendency to fling and cause ships to tumble. So ships generally have to be built very small or very evenly to be used with a gravity cannon, which proved a bit interesting to work with when it came to my bird of prey model, because it was not an even design as such. It was kind of heavier in the bottom than it was at the top, and the two sides were quite a bit heavier in the middle, which means it had a tendency to roll and tumble. I did experiment with a smaller projectile ship that looked almost like the bird of prey, but really, really small, that just flipped out as it got fired. This led me back to the normal drone controls, and because most of the drone things I was trying to do were focusing on them firing, I had the idea of, instead of adding fixed guns, adding turrets to the drones. These turrets would then be able, because turrets in the game are able to move and you're able to set the range that they are able to detect a target, I set them back down to basically a minimum target distance for where they would need to set off essentially the bombs and fire for the shield, and then set the drones at a angle that would look from the camera as if they were flying towards the shield and pulling off, but in actual fact they were flying in a straight line past the shield, which looked promising. It was then later ruled out because they just we weren't able to get the angle we wanted, so we were meant to be head on to the town, and visibly see them turn off, which just wasn't possible with the drones. Now thinking back on it, I could have done a gyroscope override. So gyroscopes, you can either override their controls. So gyroscopes keep your ship flying in a straight line and allow you to turn it and move it. And you can override their controls, and I could have done a slight pitch in the yaw, which means to angle its nose upwards and then turn, which means that it would give this kind of banking look as it does that, which would be a replicable system. I then also, with the drones, went through different variations of drone, whether fixed cannons, non-fixed cannons, adding warheads to them to make them explode, and then just leaving it to special cannons I put on the Destiny to explode and shoot them. The solution was to keep the warheads on, which posed the problem of timing. So the problem I was having is that I would have to set the warheads up on timers so that the drone can fly towards a GPS, and by the time it got to the point where it should explode, the timer would go off, the ship would explode, and the Destiny beforehand would have seemed to have fired at the Discovery. I'm calling it the Destiny. The Discovery would have seemed to have fired, hit it, and caused it to explode, which is what happens in the sequence. However, this was proven difficult because timers and drone movement aren't exactly the same. So drones have acceleration over time, so they get faster the longer they move. You can't set them at a constant speed very easily unless you start them from really far away, then accelerate them towards the target, which is what I had with the gravity cannon idea, because they would instantly go to the speed they needed and then carry on like that speed forever. That idea, of course, failed.